I am not by any stretch of the imagination making light of this story, but there is a line in the coverage of the escape from Wandsworth prison of Daniel Khalife that it becomes close to begging belief. It doesn't exactly sound like Moriarty, this bloke. In January this year, he was arrested again after a fake bomb was allegedly discovered on his desk. And not even under his desk, but on his desk. And yet the mode of escape yesterday does suggest perhaps a slightly higher level of criminal enterprise than some of the offences that he was jailed for would otherwise attest. The 21-year-old was wearing a chef's uniform of red and white checkered trousers because he'd been working in the prison kitchens. I bet he was wearing Crocs. They always wear Crocs in kitchens as well, don't they? And escaped, apparently, by clinging onto the bottom of a van that had been delivering food into the grounds of the South London prison. I've got a couple of thoughts on my mind this morning. I won't detain you unduly with the first one. But we only talk about prisons when someone escapes, or when some prisoners end up on the roof, or possibly when prison officers go on strike. It's a mad illustration of how the media works and the relationship between the media and public interest / public opinion, isn't it? I mean, it's inevitable. This isn't even a criticism. But just use this today as an illustration of how agendas are set. This is such a... I know this is sounding a bit odd, but bear with me. This is such a perfect illustration of the relationship between media, politics and public. We wouldn't know. I mean, how many people are in prison at the moment? You have to know when a prisoner escapes, especially this one, because we've been told not to approach him if you see him. But how bad are staffing issues at Wandsworth Prison, for example? I saw one politician this morning being asked how come they could have only a third of people turning up for their shift at Wandsworth not that long ago. Did you know about that? You didn't know about that. I haven't talked about that. That's the kind of thing I should probably be talking about. I don't know about that because it's not being reported anywhere else. So unless it's being reported somewhere else, you're not aware of the problem. And you're only aware of the problem because a much, much bigger problem, i.e. an escaped prisoner, is being reported. Imagine if, I think of small boats. Think of the interest that the public is being ordered to have in the small boats issue, despite the numbers in the great scheme of things being relatively negligible. But the Conservative Party are talking about it all the time. So it takes up the bandwidth in your head. In the run-up to the European Union referendum, all of the front pages about immigration were making people get very scared and angry and racist. And yet, as soon as the victory was achieved and all of the front pages diminished, despite the fact, of course, that the numbers didn't. The numbers rose, effectively, or are now higher than they were then, but you're not getting the front pages about it, so your Auntie Doris and Uncle Keith aren't using their Facebook page to spread all sorts of racist propaganda. It's very weird. I know probably some of them are, obviously, because of the small boat stuff, and Farage is still out there rubbing his thighs down in Dover with his Fisher-Price binoculars, but you get my point. It's mad, right? That we're so sheep-like, really. We are all seagulls, ultimately, even those of us who like to think occasionally that we might be trawlers. We are all seagulls following the trawlers of news in the hope of feasting on some of the fish that fall off the back of the boat. It is a... what's the word I'm looking for? It is a... It's almost certainly a lens through which we're going to look at bigger stories, okay? If there is any breaking news regarding Daniel Abed Khalife, who police believe may be trying to leave the country, again, I don't know what that's based on, except the fact that he's just escaped from prison. He's probably trying to leave the country. But if there is any breaking news on this in the course of the morning, we will, of course, bring it to you imminently. Let me give you some updates, like a proper radio presenter / journalist. Doesn't happen very often, but currently the M20 between Junctions 8 and Junction 9 is closed due to enhanced port security checks. The M20 coastbound carriageway between Junctions 8 and 9 is being temporarily closed due to delays caused by these checks. It will allow freight bound for the continent to queue on the empty section of motorway in order to keep any disruption to Kent's wider road network to a minimum. All EU-bound freight must use the M20. Other traffic must follow the signed diversion. So that's in place now on the already fairly beleaguered M20, and so it continues. But what I want to do, as I say, is use it as a lens through which to examine a broader issue. What's it like in our prisons? Are these stories about staffing crises correct? I think it might be one of those days by which the plural of anecdote is briefly data. If you work in a prison or you have recently been in a prison, ideally Wandsworth prison, but any other prison will do, I just want you to call me and talk me through what's going on. And also, here's the question for people who haven't been to prison or worked in a prison, which is, as usual on this programme, confining my callers to far too small a constituency. Why do we only talk about prisons when someone escapes? Why aren't prisons more politically pertinent? You really have Tories queuing up to compete about who can be cruelest about convicts, which, most of us don't struggle with as much as we do about their competition to be cruelest about disabled people or people on sickness benefits. But it's pretty obvious, almost all of the data supports the notion that if you look after prisoners much better than we currently do, if you prioritise rehabilitation over encouraging recidivism, then you reduce enormously the likelihood of reoffending. Illiteracy and childhood trauma, being victims of child abuse. The statistical disproportionality of people in those categories is absolutely off the charts. People who can't read or write, people who've had very dysfunctional or traumatic childhoods, the likelihood of them ending up in prison is absolutely off the charts compared to people who've had happier youths and happier formative years. And yet what do the Tories do constantly? And Labour isn't much better in my lifetime, in my memory. I don't think it is. I could be wrong. The priority is put on just punishing. And then you get your usual right-wing dinosaurs queuing up to talk about, well, prison's like a holiday camp, really, which means you've been to neither a prison nor a holiday camp for the last 50 years. But somehow, once again, though, those appetites for outrage and performative cruelty are always going to be fed. So that intrigues me. Why do you think that prisons are not? So this is a conversation we should have on a day when there's no prison-related news, on a day when there's no prison escape. Why don't prisons feature more? What is the role of prisons in politics? In America, it is actually true in some states that the private companies running prisons receive guarantees from the county or the state about how many people will be imprisoned so that they can guarantee their income stream. So they get money per prisoner. Their private sector companies, opening a prison in a state is generally considered, or in a county, is generally considered to be a win because it provides jobs and economic boosts. So in order to encourage private prison companies to open prisons in your town, you guarantee them a certain level of prisoners, a certain level of convicts coming through, which then, it is often argued, I think very successfully, influences sentencing structures from judges who are on the same ballot often as the politicians who've delivered the prison to the town. So, the role that prisons can play in politics is hard to overestimate. But did you know, for example, that a German court recently refused to extradite a prisoner to the UK because the state of UK prisons would, I think that, and I must check this story, but I think the contention was that the state of the British prison into which a German prisoner would have been extradited, or rather a British prisoner currently in a German jail, there's a philosophical conundrum for you. Is a British prisoner in a German jail a German prisoner or a British prisoner? A British person in a German jail, is that a German prisoner? Or is that a British prisoner? But anyway, there was a prisoner in a German jail who was British, and German courts decided he couldn't be extradited to this country, I think, and as I say, I need to double check this, but quite a few of you are reminding me of it, and there is a small bell tinkling in the back of my brain, because the state of the UK prison would have potentially constituted a breach of the prisoner's human rights. And remember, human rights are awful unless you're a human who likes rights. Can't believe we still have to make that point almost every morning in Suella Braverman's Brexit Britain. Down with human rights unless you're a human who likes having rights. In which case, please Please don't abolish human rights. So there it is. What is actually going on in how bad is it in prisons? How surprised are you, given your connection with the prison service, that somebody has managed to escape from a prison that seems to me to be one that he shouldn't have been in the first place? I think terror suspects and Belmarsh should go together like a horse and carriage, but I don't know much about that. And then we have the other question, the attendant question of why do you think prisons are not a more politically alive issue? Why don't we have politicians saying we're going to spend a lot of money on rehabilitating prisoners and we're going to bring the reoffending rate right down? We're going to show you the international examples and the international models that prove that this is the right approach. We're going to bring the reoffending rate down so low that the amount of money we currently spend on prisons will be enormously reduced. I don't know why they don't do that. I'll let you decide whether this is the first entrance into Idiot's Corner of the day. So it couldn't just be useless, lazy, incompetent staff at the prison. I would love to see O'Brien attempt to run any type of establishment, even for 6 months. It would be bankrupt in no time. That's bankrupt spelt with a C from our first genius of the day.